crack or not to crack? We ask if data encryption is hindering global security. Also on today's program, free speech or sedition? The protests grow wider and angrier in India. And in Picture This, the gatekeeper of Europe, Greece, prepares refugee hotspots amid growing EU pressure. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. The great encryption debate. It's been rumbling on for years, but now the FBI's ongoing dispute with Silicon Valley has come to a head. Apple has been ordered to unlock the San Bernardino gunman's iPhone, but the tech giant says such a move would threaten its customers' security. But who should hold the key to mobile phone data? The FBI says that encryption is hindering national security, but the tech industry says the order is an overreach by the US government and that weakening encryption leaves data vulnerable and undermines wider internet security. But who's right? Could the San Bernardino attacks have been stopped if encryption wasn't available? Or is the internet at risk if law enforcement agencies have their way? Today's Newsmaker is encryption, as we ask what's more dangerous, to crack or not to crack?
December 2nd, 2015. Married couple Syed Rizwan Farooq and Tashfeen Malik shot dead 14 people in San Bernardino, California. They were both killed in a shootout with police. Months later, the FBI still hasn't been able to gain access to Farooq's iPhone. It now has a court order demanding Apple help it get around the security software. Since Edward Snowden's revelations that the US National Security Agency is running a global surveillance program, Apple, like other Silicon Valley companies, has boosted its encryption software. From iOS 8 onwards, no one can access any data from an iPhone without the user's passcode, a code that even Apple doesn't have. 10 incorrect attempts to unlock and the device will automatically erase everything. A 4-digit code means there are 10,000 possible combinations. The FBI wants Apple to change Farooq's phone to give it unlimited attempts to crack the code. Apple's CEO says they will challenge the demand. In an open letter, the company says, "We oppose this order, which has implications far beyond the legal case at hand. While we believe the FBI's intentions are good, it would be wrong for the government to force us to build a backdoor into our products. And ultimately, we fear that this demand would undermine the very freedoms and liberty our government is meant to protect."
The use of encryption is at the center of terrorist tradecraft. Post-Snowden, they made a move. They changed the way they conduct themselves to thwart our ability to see them. The use of encryption is crashing into our need to achieve public safety.
The pushback from Silicon Valley to protect privacy has also given rise to more high-tech and readily available encryption apps. The FBI is warning criminal and terrorist activity is going dark. Services like WhatsApp and iMessage use end-to-end encryption, where only the people communicating can access the messages. There are also multi-layer encryption apps for secret conversations, such as Wicker and Telegram. As well as encrypting at each end, they have other levels to completely protect the messages from being intercepted. And only a device with a matching encryption key can open the message. These apps also have the option to set a timer for messages to self-destruct after they've been read. As people seek to keep themselves and their information safe from prying eyes, the technology to combat surveillance continues to develop, and the ability of law enforcement agencies to deal with this new anti-surveillance age is becoming more challenging. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss if law enforcement agencies have a right to hack into phone data in London is Alan Mendoza, the founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. And in Zug, Switzerland is Eleanor Saita, a security engineer and hacker. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. Mr. Mendoza, let me start with you. This is a part of Apple's response that they put up on their website. The US government has asked us for something we simply do not have and something we consider too dangerous to create. They have asked us to build a backdoor to the iPhone. So they cannot and they will not. Alan Mendoza, do you think it was the right thing to do from Apple?
Of course not. I mean, there are dangers with backdoors, we know that. However, there's a very clear national security prerogative here. We have a terrorist who has committed mass murder. His phone can't be accessed. Apple can create a way to access his phone. Apple should be allowing his phone to be accessed. It's a very clear case. This isn't a borderline case of liberty versus other matters. This is someone who everyone knows did it. He publicly did it. We all have seen he's done it, and they won't give access to his phone. That's a very serious issue on Apple's part.
Eleanor Saita, Apple's made a big mistake, according to Alan Mendoza. What do you think?
Absolutely not. If we undermine encryption and start building backdoors into systems, we lose our fundamental ability to protect critical infrastructure. The security of that infrastructure is national security. By undermining it as we build backdoors into things, we destroy the things that we're supposed to be trying to protect.
Eleanor, I want to quote to you the CIA boss, John Brennan, after Paris, where 130 people were killed. He said, "We knew the system was blinking red. We knew just in the days before that ISIL or ISIS was trying to carry out something, but the individuals involved have been able to take advantage of the newly available means of communication that are walled off from law enforcement officials." And of course, investigators had suggested that the attackers were using Telegram in the build-up to the attack. Don't you, Eleanor, get a little cold shiver when you hear that from the CIA boss?
Not at all. First of all, it's mostly not true. We know very few cases where the use of encryption has in any way prevented national security from acting on this information. In most of the attacks that we've seen, even where encryption was involved, they already knew the individuals in respect. They were already tracking them. The problem was that they're capturing too much data as it is, and they're simply ignoring the information that they should be paying attention to. There is no problem of going dark at the national security scale.
There is no problem of going dark. Alan Mendoza?
Well, the CIA director has said something different. I think I'd take the CIA director's word on that. I think it's quite clear that, yes, there may be collection issues in terms of analysis of data, but that always occurs. We know how the intelligence cycle works. You collect, you then have to analyze, you have to pick things out. But if we're missing things because they are being encrypted, then obviously they can't even be analyzed. So there's obviously a very serious problem on that score.
Alan, I want to ask you about what the Electronic Frontier Foundation said regarding the slippery slope. Kurt Opsahl, legal counsel for the EFF, said if the US government can force Apple to do this, why can't the Chinese or Russian governments? Other countries will ask for the same power. Do we want to have this be universal? Does Kurt Opsahl make a good point, Alan, in terms of that slippery slope?
Well, I think there are two different things. Firstly, Apple is a US company. So the US company asking, US government asking a US company to do this, obviously there's a question straight away, same jurisdiction. Were the Chinese government, were the Russian government to ask Apple, Apple would be in its rights to say no. That might cost them the market, but then there's a cost in doing business with dictatorships, full stop. If you want to proceed down that line, we may well end up segmenting telecommunications in that way. But frankly, I don't want the Russians or the Chinese getting hold of private communications from Western countries. That's just a recipe for madness. However, when the US government asks one of its companies to do that, then I see no reason why that company should not oblige if there is a very clear and pressing national security reason for it to do so.
Eleanor Saita, do you think that we're on the verge of this becoming universal if a company like Apple gives in?
We absolutely are. Mr. Mendoza doesn't seem to understand that he's threatening the entirety of the security of internet communications and really the existence of the internet. The cost for removing security from the internet would be phenomenal, and it means that all of our IoT revolutions, all of our hospital infrastructure, all of our critical systems are going to be at fundamental risk. There's no way to segment or stop this once it starts happening. The demands will be universal, and we simply can't afford it. And further, I'd like to add that the NSA director has directly contradicted CIA on the matter of going dark. NSA does not have this problem. They are not concerned about people going dark. They're not concerned about the need for backdoors, and they've explicitly said that they do not want backdoors.
Eleanor, why don't you trust the legal system in the sense that if they have the tools available, they still will have to get a court order from a judge to look at someone? They're not just going to go willy-nilly and hunt down people. Why don't you trust that system, Eleanor?
Because historically, that's not what they've done. As soon as they have these tools available, they deploy them at scale wherever they can possibly grab them. And even if you trust the US to do that, why would you trust the Russians? They are going to have access to the same systems because in the end, we're going to be looking at destroying the internet. We're going to be looking at partitioning the entire internet, and we're going to decide it's not worth the cost. By putting backdoors into American systems, even just for limited cases, you are actively reducing the security of American infrastructure.
Alan, she makes a good point, doesn't she? It's a bit like nuclear proliferation, isn't it? Once one country builds a bomb, others will learn the technology, and so on and so forth.
Well, it's slightly different to nuclear proliferation, which is a very different ball game. But no, look, there are dangers with backdoors. Of course there are. No one's denying that. But there was a very interesting divergence in the response you got. On the one hand, it was the internet will end, it will all be a disaster in that point. And then secondly, it came, well, actually, it might not end if only one country does it. Yes, it will remove certain infrastructure issues and make it more susceptible to attack, but actually it'll only be that country. The truth is, this works both ways.
Yeah.
Yes, if you just open a backdoor one way, you might find that it can be accessed. I think there are, of course, liberty issues, but we have to face facts. We're moving into a world where terrorism has moved largely online in terms of communications. We are getting the forms of communication we could never have dreamt of 10, 15 years ago. Intelligence services have to play catch-up to that. If we don't, the blood of innocence will be on the hands of those who've said don't allow encryption to be broken. That's where it ends up. It ends up with terrorist attacks happening because we have been unable to intercept communications in that way.
Alan Mendoza, do you think that Edward Snowden has blood on his hands?
Edward Snowden certainly has blood on his hands. He's got blood on his hands in two ways. Firstly, because the information that he leaked has led to people directly being identified in terms of the intelligence they provided to Western agencies. And secondly, because the unveiling or the revelations of techniques used by the West has indeed led to terrorist groups changing their techniques and changing their patterns.
Eleanor Saita, I'm going to give you an opportunity to defend Edward Snowden and yourself. Go ahead.
So Mr. Mendoza fails to understand the actual risk analysis that he's talking about. We are mostly losing the fight to secure the internet. We are already at the edge of having serious critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, and the situation is not getting better. We cannot afford to categorically hamstring and destroy the only functional tools that we have for guaranteeing internet security. Fundamentally, the problem is that mass surveillance doesn't work. We have very little evidence that all of this mass data gathering is actually improving response. You know, you claim that we need, that intelligence agencies have to keep up, but they're eliminating human. They're stopping the work which has historically been actually successful. They're focusing on tech. It's not working. It's time for intelligence agencies to go back to doing their jobs, which is tracking people that they already know about and understanding those people's intention, and to stop trying to dig into everyone's back doors and everyone's backyards and leave people alone.
Okay.
Without Snowden, we wouldn't have understood the scale and the scope of this, and we wouldn't have evidence for it. There was significant wrongdoing by both GCHQ and NSA. They have broken their regulations, their restrictions that they're supposed to act within repeatedly. There is no reason to trust these agencies to not do this again in the future. And without Snowden, we would not know this.
Okay. Alan Mendoza, final thoughts. Needle in a haystack. Mass surveillance does not work.
What you're hearing is a libertarian argument dressed up in some kind of pseudo-security talk. It's designed from this perspective of saying to government, get your hands off people's data. Government's not interested in people's data. Government is interested in stopping national security disasters. That's what the government is there to do. And I'm afraid we have to move with the times and ensure that we enable access to communications so that government can do its job and that terrorists can be stopped.
Okay. Eleanor, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to wrap us up.
We're seeing the government, especially the UK, go after NGOs, after nonprofits, after activist groups that are completely nonviolent. The government has already overstepped the bounds. They are not using these tools in the way that they're supposed to be used. They shouldn't have access to them.
Okay, Eleanor Saita and Alan Mendoza. This interview will self-destruct in 10 seconds. like one of those wicker messages. Thank you very much for joining us. We have run out of time. It's been a pleasure. Still to come on the Newsmakers, free speech or anti-India sentiments. We ask what's going on in the country's universities. And in Picture This, Greece prepares to open refugee hotspots. Protests are taking place in universities across India after the arrest of a student union leader accused of sedition. They've been met with counter-protests by right-wing supporters of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The students say the Indian government is using colonial-era sedition laws to crack down on freedom of speech and dissent. The Newsmaker's Sandra Gutman has the story.
A political divide in India's capital is flaring up. Students, teachers, and journalists in Delhi are outraged over the arrest of a student activist at Jawaharlal Nehru University.
He is Kanhaiya Kumar and is the president of the JNU Students' Union. He has been charged with sedition under Section 124A of the Indian Penal Code.
His appearance in court sparked scuffles between lawyers, and witnesses say Kumar was beaten up. Protesters across the country cite a growing threat to freedom of expression, but government loyalists say they're being anti-Indian. What began as student-led action has grown into a national debate about democracy and tolerance in India. At the center of the row is a battle between right and left political camps. 3 years ago, Muhammad Asfal Guru was executed for his role in a 2001 attack on the Indian Parliament. Left-wing protesters were marking the anniversary of his death on Friday, but their chants were considered by some to be anti-national.
This is not freedom of speech.
Including the host of India's most watched English news program, who accused a protest organizer of being a traitor.
Which side are you on?
The arrests have fueled frustration with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ruling party and its nationalist parent, the RSS.
We think that this saffron terror that is being waged relentlessly upon the students of JNU, they are being constantly harassed by the RSS cadres and other such RSS affiliates.
In the north, Kashmir separatists have also jumped to the defense of the anti-government movement, a sign of tension expanding beyond India's capital. India's government has been accused of silencing students to quell political dissent. Home Minister Rajnath Singh tweeted, "If anyone shouts anti-Indian slogans and challenges the nation's sovereignty and integrity while living in India, they will not be tolerated or spared." Students have staged more than 18 protests at universities, which have become the new battleground between left-wing secularists and supporters of the Hindu nationalist government. In January, demonstrations broke out after Rohit Vemula, a student activist, committed suicide. He was threatened by his university in Hyderabad for criticizing India's class divide. For students back at Delhi's JNU, university life has come to a standstill as their campaign continues to grip the country. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now with more on the India protests is Sonia Falero, award-winning Indian author and journalist whose father is an Indian National Congress politician and former Minister Eduardo Falero. She joins us from London. Thank you very much for joining us, Sonia. So, Kanhaiya Kumar was beaten up by lawyers in court. I mean, how has all of this gotten so incredibly out of hand?
I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking because, this young man is a member of the Students' Union. The union was well within its rights to have a debate, a conversation about the Kashmiri separatists. And in fact, Kanhaiya Kumar was not part of that debate. He was actually, in his speech, he was asking for people to calm down. But somehow he ended up getting picked up by the police. And these incredibly I think, aggressive charges of sedition, which can carry a life sentence, and in fact date back to, the British colonial period, were slapped on this young PhD student. And he was attacked on his way to court yesterday. He was attacked today, even though it seemed as though the entire police force was at the court. And the turn of events, the incredibly aggressive turn of events that has sort of attempted to divide people into whether or not they are patriots or anti-nationals, is extremely disturbing for, I think, not just Indians, but Indians all over the world.
Now, trying to go to the root of this and maybe look at the trigger, and trying to get a holistic view of this. I'm looking at the protest commemorating Afzal Guru, the man behind the Indian Parliament attack. The slogans reported to have been chanted were Afzal, your death will bring revolution, India should shatter into pieces, among other slogans. Now, while accepting their right to free speech, can you understand why so many nationalistic Indians would have been so upset by that as a trigger?
There are always going to be issues when you're dealing with 1 billion people, and this is not a homogeneous country. I mean, this is a secular country. There are people of all religions. We come from different cultural backgrounds. Every state has multiple languages. We are similar and yet very, very different. And our laws protect our constitutional right to express these differences. Now, look, do I care for what those students said? I don't share their opinion, and yet it would never occur to me, and I don't think it would occur to any law-abiding Indian to suggest that another Indian, a young person expressing his opinion freely in the protective cocoon of a university should be described as anti-national and dragged to jail for expressing his opinion. I understand that these are very sensitive subjects. Kashmir will always be, understandably, a sensitive subject because we all feel very vested in it. But the way forward is not to act in a manner that is so divisive.
Okay, big picture then. Do you believe that in Modi's new India, that the charge of sedition and the charge of being anti-national is being used as a weapon to crush any and all opposition?
Look, one certainly sees the signs, and it looks like this law, which we really should have repealed a very, very long time ago, is going to be used against people who are expressing themselves in a way that is not acceptable to this government. I think we need to look at a much bigger picture here and say, why is it that over the past 2 years we've been talking about patriotism and nationalism and freedom of speech and expression in a country where the majority is still poor, where the economy has slowed down, where many people still don't have jobs? Why are we talking about these things that are not helping India when the issues of development that will help India have been ignored? Who is benefiting from this conversation that has overtaken our lives over the past 2 years?
Yes, the country is undoubtedly deeply divided over this issue. It's been fascinating to pick your brain. Thank you very much, Sonia Falero. Great pleasure. In today's Picture This, Greece has announced it is to open 5 so-called hotspot refugee registration centres in time for an EU summit this week, as pressure mounts on Athens to control the influx of migrants into Europe. Let's take a look. Today's newsmaker has been encryption, the conversion of data into a form that cannot be read by unauthorized people. A seemingly simple notion, but it's driving a wedge between law enforcement agencies and the tech world. The FBI says that encryption is hindering national security, but the tech companies argue creating software powerful enough to decrypt data could pose an even bigger threat to global security that they say could have implications far beyond just one legal case. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gupta. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.